Welcome to this week's Okay at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about business succession planning. So this can take a lot of different forms, right? So there's internal, there's selling your business, there's continuity with clients and management systems within a company. So a lot to think about here. And as much as we might all feel like we're going to work forever, even business owners eventually might want to retire or, spend some time on the beach instead of growing their business. So what are some things that business owners should be thinking about as it relates to succession planning for themselves or for key employees they might have?
Yeah, so for themselves, and I think this question applies to key employees as well. It's kind of like the proverbial, like, what happened if I got hit by a bus tomorrow type question. What happens to the business if I'm out? And that covers a lot of ground, right? There's, you know, ownership, operation, who's going to do what? Do we have a backup plan? Are the passwords accessible to someone? Can someone even get into the bank account? Who can sign the checks? So I think depending on the size of your company, like there are a lot of questions that you have to answer. And I think, just as a starting point, like that is the right prompt is if I'm not here tomorrow, if I'm incapacitated, if I'm out, even if I'm just out for 2 weeks, like how does the business function without me for 2 weeks? And then what if it's a month? What if it's a year? What if it's forever? You can just keep pushing those questions out and thinking about how you would get by. And you can take that same, philosophical approach to key employees as well. What would I do if this person's out for a month? What if they're on leave for 6 months? What if, and it doesn't have to be because of the boss, right? It could be they just decide to go work somewhere else. What do I do if this person isn't here tomorrow or they give 2 weeks notice and they're gone? So I think just kind of pulling that thread of if they weren't here, if I wasn't here, what would people struggle with? What help would we need? And then you can kind of graduate to, okay, well, what can we do to hedge that risk? And what can we do to put backstops in place? And, what planning can we do now? And hopefully we never have to implement it, but what planning can we do now for these crisis type situations?
Yeah, I think it's important too to think about if you do have even so in addition to the emergency situation. So that's kind of the starting point of thinking about it. And then if you end up are looking at like an exit plan and like, all right, I want to be out by X date, and you start working to a date, things always take longer than you expect. I think is something to keep in mind here as well. And there's always more moving pieces in transitioning a business than one would think. And so it's definitely something to be thinking about well in advance. And the more in advance you're thinking about it, the better. And then if that timeline shrinks because of one of those emergency situations, then you're at least already started and things as well. And this also brings up the point of estate planning and that piece as well, right? So it's like, all right, if you're going to move out of your, be moving out of your business and then something does happen, or in these emergency situations, even more important, well, what does that look like? Your spouse, your family, whoever might be involved with that. So I think that's also something to highlight and just another moving piece in one of these analysis.
Yeah, well, you mentioned family members and spouses. We've seen the situation where you have, two business partners that own a business together, and one of the business partners passes away, and now, who takes their place? Where does that go? And does it go to the deceased partner's spouse? Because if you don't do anything, that's probably where it goes. And maybe that spouse doesn't want to be in the business. Maybe the other partner doesn't want to be in business with the deceased partner's spouse. So maybe you get a buy sell and you iron these things out ahead of time and you make plans for these scenarios. So and again, hopefully you don't ever have to trigger it for that reason. But it's just the forward thinking, the planning, I'm growing my business. This is great, but something bad could happen. I should be prepared for it. And I know that's not, entirely consistent with the entrepreneurial spirit to think about like the bad things that could happen. But bad things can happen. And not saying to spend a whole lot of time on it or dwell on it or, stay up at night having nightmares about it, to the extent you don't already. But, be prepared for it, plan for it. And, that, that'll keep everyone going forward. It'll protect, your loved ones' interest in the business. It'll protect your partners and your employees. It's just something, worth planning and being prepared for.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that, I mean, sometimes these things are really hard to think about, especially for entrepreneurs who are just full steam ahead all the time and just don't want to think about these things. So, but it makes it even more important to think about them and just make sure you've got a plan so that you can continue to go full steam ahead, and hopefully you don't run into any bumps in the road, but you kind of have to assume that you will, and the more planned you are, the better. So, well, thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.